I never thought I would share this story. There are some kinds of pain that silence you completely. Pain that doesn't scream, but instead sits quietly in your chest like a weight you can't lift. There was a time I didn't want to wake up anymore. Not because I wanted to die, but because I didn't know how to live with what I was going through. I was diagnosed with a chronic illness. The doctors didn't sugarcoat it. They said it wouldn't go away, that I would have to manage it. They smiled gently, but their eyes held the truth. My life had changed forever. That day, I walked out of the hospital alone. I sat in my car for over an hour. No music, no movement, just the sound of the engine cooling and the ticking of the clock. I remember gripping the steering wheel like it would somehow hold me together. But nothing could. I felt like I was unraveling. I was tired, not just in my body, but in my spirit. There's a kind of exhaustion that sleep can't fix. That's the kind I had. People around me didn't know what to say. Some said, "Stay positive." Others avoided me altogether. I don't blame them. Pain makes people uncomfortable. It reminds them of how fragile we all are. I wasn't religious. I didn't grow up in church. I had heard about God, but I didn't know him. And to be honest, I didn't think he would care about someone like me. But then, something unexpected happened. One night, lying in bed, with my phone glowing in the dark, I came across a video. A woman was standing in a field, tears in her eyes, saying, "If you're in pain, just whisper his name. Jesus is listening." I don't know why I didn't scroll past like I usually do. I stopped. I watched the whole thing. I even replayed it. And then, for the first time in my life, I whispered into the silence of my room, "Jesus, if you're real, please don't leave me alone." I didn't hear a voice. I didn't see a vision. But I felt something shift. Not in my body, but in my heart. A quiet stillness. A warmth. Like someone had sat beside me in the dark and was simply there. That was the beginning. Not of healing in the way I expected, but of something deeper. Something I didn't even know I needed. Maybe you're listening to this right now, and you're in pain too. Maybe no one knows how much you're carrying. Maybe you've learned to hide it well. I'm not here to promise you a miracle, but I am here to tell you, you're not alone, even when you feel like you are. Especially then, God is not far away. He's closer than your next breath. And even if all you can do is whisper, He hears you. Sometimes people ask me, "How did you know it was God?" And I always answer with the same quiet truth. Because for the first time, I felt peace that didn't make sense. It wasn't the kind of peace you get when things go your way. It wasn't because I had good news. In fact, I didn't. The diagnosis was still the same. The treatments were still exhausting. But somehow, my soul wasn't screaming anymore. There's a verse in the Bible that says, "And the peace of God, which transcends all understanding, will guard your hearts and your minds in Christ Jesus." Philippians 4:7. That's what I was feeling. Peace that transcended understanding. I didn't become religious overnight. I didn't suddenly have all the right words. I still struggled. I still doubted. I still had moments where I cried into my pillow and asked, "Where are you, God?" But I noticed something. Even in those questions, I no longer felt alone. I started to talk to him more, not in formal prayers, just in real, raw conversation. Some days it sounded like, "God, I'm scared." I don't know what to do. I don't even know if you're listening, but I hope you are. And then something beautiful happened. I started to recognize his presence, not in loud, dramatic ways, but in the quiet things. A sunrise I hadn't noticed before. A stranger holding the door and smiling like they'd known me for years. A song playing in a store that spoke directly to what I was feeling. Moments that felt personal, like someone knew me, like someone cared. It wasn't just about healing my body anymore. It became about healing the part of me I didn't know was broken. My heart, my identity, my purpose. Because illness didn't just steal my health. It stole my sense of direction. It made me question whether I mattered anymore, whether I had anything left to give, whether I was just a burden. But in those moments with God, those quiet whispers, those little signs, I began to feel worthy again. Not because I was strong, but because He was. Not because I had something to prove, but because He loved me already. This part of my story doesn't end with a miracle cure. It ends with a miracle of the soul. I began to feel hope again. I began to imagine a future. I began to believe that even if nothing changed in my circumstances, something had changed in me. And that was enough. So if you're listening and you're in that place, that in-between place where pain and faith are colliding, I want to say this to you gently and with all the love I can. You don't have to climb your way out of the darkness alone. You don't even have to know what to say. Sometimes, all it takes is a whisper, "Jesus, help me." That's how my journey began. Not with answers, not with certainty, but with a whisper in the dark and the quiet arrival of grace. That was the beginning of everything changing, not because my pain vanished, but because I stopped facing it alone. You see, when you suffer for a long time, people start expecting you to be used to it. But pain doesn't work that way. It wears you down, quietly, daily. And some days, just breathing feels like a battle. But in those quiet, hurting places, I began to experience something I had never felt before. Companionship in the suffering. There were days when I felt too weak to pray. So I would just sit in silence, and somehow, I don't know how, I would feel held, not physically, but emotionally, spiritually. Like God wasn't demanding words from me. He was just there. I began to understand a part of Jesus I had never seen before. Not just the miracle worker, not just the teacher, but the man of sorrows, the one who wept, the one who suffered. He was despised and rejected by mankind, a man of suffering and familiar with pain. Isaiah 53:3. I realized Jesus knows what it feels like to be in pain. He understands what it means to cry out and feel unheard. He knows what it is to be alone, afraid, misunderstood. And because of that, He doesn't just offer sympathy, He offers solidarity. He sits with us in our dark nights. He doesn't rush us. He doesn't scold us for doubting. He meets us in our weakness. I started journaling, not because I wanted to be productive, but because I needed to release what was inside. Some days, my journal was full of questions. God, why me? Why now? What is the point of all this pain? Other days, it was just a single line. Thank you for staying when everyone else left. That's the thing about pain. It either hardens your heart or breaks it open. And when mine broke open, God poured himself in. There was a night I will never forget. I was awake at 2 a.m., pacing the living room because of another wave of nausea and restlessness. I was tired, beyond tired, but sleep wouldn't come. I dropped to my knees, not out of devotion, but defeat. I said, I don't have anything left to give you. And deep inside, I heard, not audibly, but unmistakably, I never asked for anything. I just want you. That's the kind of love I didn't know existed. A love that doesn't wait for you to get better. A love that sits beside you in the mess. A love that stays even when you're too weak to reach for it. Pain was the doorway, and on the other side, I didn't find a quick fix. I found a relationship, not a religion, not a checklist, not a demand for perfection. Just Jesus. When you've been hurt by life, by people, or by the silence of your own prayers, trust doesn't come back easily. That's something no one warned me about. They told me to have faith, to let go and let God, to believe even when I couldn't see. But what they didn't say is how hard it is to trust again after disappointment, because I had prayed before and nothing changed. I had hoped and it didn't work out. I had believed and still felt broken. So when people said, just trust God, I wanted to ask, how? How do you trust again when your heart is full of doubt? Here's what I learned. Trust doesn't always begin with belief. Sometimes it begins with honesty. I stopped trying to pretend I had perfect faith. Instead, I started talking to God like I would a friend I wasn't sure I could trust, but still wanted to. I said things like, I want to trust you, but I don't know how. I feel like you let me down. I don't know if you're good, but I hope you are. And do you know what happened? He didn't turn away. He didn't scold me. He didn't shame me. Instead, he stayed. That's when I realized God is not intimidated by our questions. He's not offended by our honesty. He invites it. One morning, I read a story in the Bible that I had heard 1,000 times before. But this time, it came alive to me. It was about a father whose son was suffering. He brought the boy to Jesus, asking for healing. But he didn't come with perfect faith. He came with desperation and a fragile heart. He said, I do believe. Help me overcome my unbelief. In Nehemiah 9:24. That verse changed me. It showed me that faith doesn't mean being 100% certain all the time. Sometimes, faith is just showing up with whatever you've got. Even if all you have is 51% hope and 49% fear, that's enough. Even if all you have is one shaky step forward, that's enough. Even if all you have is a whisper of trust, that's enough. Trust isn't built in a moment. It's built in the everyday. It's built in the choice to open your eyes in the morning and say, okay, I'll try again. It's built in the late nights when you pray, not because you feel strong, but because you know He's your only hope. It's built when you start noticing the little signs, a word of kindness, a moment of peace, a breath that feels just a bit easier. Slowly, gently, quietly, trust grows, not as something you force, but as something you allow. Looking back, I realize something powerful. God never expected me to be perfect. He just wanted me to come close, even with questions, even with fear, even with a faith held together by threads, because in His hands, even the smallest thread is enough. There is a moment after the long night after the pain, after the silence, when you see it, just a glimpse, light. It doesn't flood in all at once. It peeks through, like morning through heavy curtains, like a soft breeze through a cracked window, like a flicker of hope you didn't expect to feel again. And when it comes, you almost don't trust it, because after so many days in the dark, your heart has forgotten what light looks like. But it's real, and it's there. For me, the first signs of light didn't come in grand miracles. They came in the smallest moments. One morning, I woke up and didn't feel dread, not joy, not excitement, just the absence of dread. And that, for me, was a miracle. Another day, I laughed, genuinely laughed, at something small. It startled me. I hadn't heard that sound from myself in months. One night, I listened to worship music again, not because I felt spiritual, but because I missed the voice of peace. I started writing again. I began drinking water regularly. I cleaned the corner of my room that had been ignored for weeks. Tiny steps, but every step was sacred, because each one whispered, "You're still here. You're still breathing." And healing is happening, slowly, quietly, faithfully. Healing doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes it's just waking up and realizing you haven't cried yet today. Sometimes it's saying thank you before "help me." Sometimes it's pausing mid-panic and remembering to breathe. I used to think healing meant everything going back to normal. Now I know healing is becoming new, even when nothing outside has changed. One of the most powerful moments during this time came when I stepped outside one morning. The sky was the same. The air was cool. Nothing looked extraordinary. But for some reason, I stopped and whispered, "Thank you for letting me see this day." And I meant it. Gratitude had begun to return. Not forced, not fake, but real. Not because life was easy, but because God was near. That's what the first light does. It softens the ache. It reminds you of beauty. It calls your soul back to life. And maybe, as you're listening now, you're starting to feel it too. That little pull, that flicker, that quiet voice that says, "It's not over. I'm still working. There is light ahead." God, you don't have to run toward it. You don't have to chase it. Just notice it. Welcome it. Let it warm the corners of your soul. Because this is how it begins. There's a difference between believing in God and knowing Him. For most of my life, God was a concept, a distant figure, someone I believed in during holidays or emergencies. But somewhere along this journey, through the quiet nights, the whispered prayers, and the fragile trust, something shifted. I stopped talking about God, and I started talking with Him. It began like any new friendship, slowly, awkwardly, with questions. I wasn't sure if I was doing it right. Sometimes I would speak out loud. Other times, I would just think a sentence and wonder if He heard it. But every time I reached out, I sensed something reaching back. Not a booming voice, not a sign in the sky, just presence, unshakable, gentle, near. And I realized God wasn't interested in performance. He was interested in connection. Some mornings, I would talk to Him like I would to a friend. "I don't feel okay today. I'm afraid I'll fall back into the dark. Thank you for helping me get out of bed." Some nights, I'd just sit in silence and imagine Him sitting beside me, not judging, not rushing, just being there. And it healed something inside me because for the first time, I wasn't alone with my thoughts. I wasn't carrying everything by myself. The Bible says, I no longer call you servants. Instead, I have called you friends. John 15:15. Friend, let that word sink in. Jesus didn't just come to rescue you. He came to know you, to walk with you, to share your pain, your joy, your journey. He doesn't just want your worship. He wants your words, your laughter, your frustrations, your questions. He wants all of it. I started to notice that the more I spoke to him, the more I felt peace in places I didn't even realize were anxious. The more I listened, the more I recognized his voice, not in my ears, but in my heart. He reminded me of who I was. He reminded me that I wasn't forgotten. He reminded me that no matter what I faced, I wouldn't face it alone. That's what friendship with Jesus does. It doesn't promise a storm-free life, but it promises you'll never be in the storm by yourself again. And over time, that friendship became the foundation of everything else in my life. Not religion, not rules, just relationship. And from that relationship came strength, came joy, came healing. There wasn't a trumpet, no bright light, no aha moment with tears falling down my face. It was just a regular day. I was brushing my teeth of all things. The sun was coming through the window, and a soft breeze was moving the curtain. And suddenly, I realized something. I wasn't afraid anymore. It wasn't that everything in my life had changed. I still had challenges. My body still felt weak some days. Bills still needed paying. Questions still remained unanswered. But the fear, that constant gnawing dread that used to sit in my chest like a stone, was gone. It took me a moment to understand what I was feeling. I had gotten so used to living in fear that its absence felt strange. I stood in the mirror and whispered to myself, I'm okay. I'm really okay. Not perfect, not pain-free, but at peace. How did it happen? I think it was gradual, like light filling a room. It starts with a crack in the door. Then slowly, the darkness begins to lose its grip. I had spent so long expecting the worst, waiting for the other shoe to drop, living from crisis to crisis. But as I kept walking with God, day by day, prayer by prayer, He didn't just heal the surface wounds, He went deeper. He rewrote the story I told myself from, you're weak, to, you're held, from, you won't make it, to, I'm walking with you, from, you're all alone, to, you are loved completely. That's the power of real peace. It doesn't come from control. It comes from surrender. And surrender isn't giving up. It's giving in to the one who already sees the whole picture. When you know Jesus is in the boat with you, you stop fearing the waves. And let me say this clearly. If you still feel afraid right now, it doesn't mean you're failing. It just means you're human. Faith isn't the absence of fear. Faith is what holds your hand while you walk through it. And one day, maybe sooner than you think, you'll wake up and realize the fear that once ruled you doesn't anymore. And in its place is something stronger, quieter, deeper, peace. At first, I only looked for God in the big moments. I thought He would show up in a dramatic healing, a thunderous sign, or an unexplainable miracle. But instead, He started showing up in places I never thought to look, in the ordinary. One morning, I was sitting by the window with a cup of tea in my hand. The light was soft, the world was quiet, and I realized I felt calm. It wasn't a special day. No breakthrough had happened. But in that still moment, I felt God whisper, "I'm here." Another time, I was walking through the grocery store. I passed an elderly woman who smiled at me for no reason. Her eyes were kind, tired, but full of something I couldn't explain. That smile stayed with me all day. It reminded me that God speaks through people, through gestures, through presence, even through strangers. I started to notice him in the laughter of children, in a favorite song playing unexpectedly, in a friend texting me exactly what I needed to hear without knowing I needed it. These weren't coincidences. They were love notes, proof that heaven still touches earth, and that God is closer than we think. You see, God doesn't just meet us on mountaintops. He walks with us through kitchens and hospital rooms, through traffic jams and lunch breaks, through quiet Tuesday mornings and long, restless nights. He's not just present in miracles. He is the miracle, woven into every breath we take. The Bible says, "Surely the Lord is in this place, and I was not aware of it." Genesis 28:16. That verse pierced my heart the first time I read it, because how many times had God been right beside me, and I missed it? Not because he was silent, but because I wasn't still. So I began a new practice. Every night, before bed, I asked one simple question: where did I see you today, God? Some days, I'd remember a kind word. Other days, just the feeling of the sun on my face. And sometimes, it was simply the strength to get through the day. All of it was sacred. I no longer needed lightning bolts to know he was with me. I only needed eyes to see and a heart willing to notice. Because when we train our hearts to recognize God in the ordinary, we begin to realize something beautiful. There's no such thing as ordinary when God is involved. It happens slowly, so slowly, in fact, that I didn't even notice it at first. But one day, I looked back and realized I wasn't the same person anymore. I used to define myself by what I could do, by how much I could carry, by how put together I looked on the outside. I thought strength meant silence, that faith meant never doubting, that healing meant going back to who I used to be. But I was wrong, because healing didn't take me back. It took me deeper. The pain didn't just change my story. It changed me, and not in the way I feared. It didn't break me forever. It didn't make me bitter. It didn't make me weaker. Instead, it made me softer, more aware, more compassionate, more present, more in love with the God who stayed. I stopped needing to have all the answers. I stopped chasing approval. I stopped performing for a version of God who was never asking me to be perfect. Instead, I started asking deeper questions. What really matters? Who am I becoming? Where is God leading me now? And I started noticing that my prayers were changing too. Less of, "God, fix this." More of, "God, be near. God, shape me. God, use this, even this." One of the most beautiful things about walking with Jesus is that he's never in a rush to change you. He doesn't shame you for how long it's taking. He doesn't scold you for not getting it right. He simply walks beside you, patiently, steadily, whispering, "You're growing. Keep going. I'm proud of you." So if you feel like you're not changing fast enough, if you wonder whether any of this is working, if you're tired of starting over, let me gently remind you, you're not who you used to be. And even if no one else sees it yet, he does. He sees every surrendered moment, every small act of trust, Every time you choose hope when fear would be easier, He sees you and He smiles. The old version of you. They served their purpose. They carried what they could. But now, it's time for something new. And the person you're becoming? Stronger, softer, steadier, spirit-filled. Because the one who is remaking you, He doesn't make mistakes. I used to think grace was just a religious word. Something you said before meals. Something you sang about in church. Something you asked for when you made a mistake. But then, I lived through something that broke me. And I finally understood what grace really is. Grace is what finds you when you have nothing left to give. It's not pity. It's not a reward. It's not, you've been good, so here's your blessing. It's love. When you feel unlovable. It's kindness. When you expect punishment. It's rest. When you've done nothing to earn it. Grace is the moment you realize, God still wants me, even now, even like this. There was a season in my pain where I felt so ashamed of how weak I had become. I couldn't work. I couldn't serve. I could barely pray some days. And yet, I kept sensing God drawing closer, not because I was doing anything right, but because grace doesn't wait for you to be strong. Grace kneels down beside you, right in the middle of the mess, and says, I'm not leaving. I'm not disappointed. I'm not done with you. One day, I read this verse, and it changed everything. My grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness. 2 Corinthians 12:9. Perfect in weakness, not in strength, not in success, not in flawless performance. In weakness, that's where grace does its best work. Since then, I've started seeing grace everywhere. In the breath I take each morning, in the food on my table, in the friend who checks in when I've gone quiet, in the moments I feel peace I didn't earn, and maybe most of all, in the fact that I no longer feel like I have to prove anything to God. He already knows me, and He still says, come, not after I fix myself, not when I'm more faithful, but now, just as I am. This is what grace feels like. Light when the world goes dim. A hand reaching down when you're too tired to stand. The sound of your name spoken with love, not judgment. A place to rest without earning it. So, if you're still trying to deserve your way into healing, stop. You don't have to fight for what God is freely giving you. Just open your hands and receive it, because grace isn't about getting it right. It's about knowing who is holding you when everything else falls apart. This isn't a story with a perfect ending. There are no fireworks, no happily ever after in the way the world writes it. But there is something even better, a quiet, steady promise that the journey is not over and I am not alone. I still have hard days. There are mornings when my body aches and the fear tries to creep back in. There are moments when I get discouraged. There are prayers I'm still waiting to see answered. But the difference now, I know who walks with me, and that changes everything. Walking with Jesus doesn't mean the road is easy, but it means the road is never empty. He walks with me when I'm tired, when I'm angry, when I don't understand, when I don't feel strong. He walks with me when I'm laughing again, really laughing, when I feel hope blooming in places I thought were dead, when I wake up and realize I'm still here. And that matters. Faith isn't always loud. Sometimes it's just the decision to take one more step, to show up for one more day, to whisper, thank you, through tears. And on this side of my story, here's what I know now. Healing is not a moment. It's a journey. It's 1,000 little choices to keep trusting, even when you don't feel like it. It's learning to live open-hearted, even after you've been hurt. It's holding on to God, not just when He feels close, but even when He feels silent. So if you've walked with me through this story, thank you. Thank you for listening. Thank you for letting me be honest. Thank you for being brave enough to face your own pain. And I want to leave you with this truth. You are not forgotten. You are not too broken. You are not too far gone. Jesus sees you. Jesus hears you. Jesus is still calling your name. There will be more hard days, but there will also be more light, more laughter, more reminders that grace is real. And when those dark days come again, I'll remember this. I've been there before. And God met me in it. He'll do it again. This is not the end. This is the beginning of walking with Him every day, in every moment, no matter what comes. And that is more than enough. Amen.